Alright, welcome back to Operation End Times. I'm your Jedi Warrior for Jesus, Ben Hellistead. This is Job, the End Time Man, part of the Wilderness series, Exodus 2012. This is actually part 1B. Fortunately, I didn't get everything that I wanted to say said in the first part. So I'm going to try and wrap up part 1 right now. But where we left off, we were talking about Job. And excuse me for a second, but I'm going to take my rose-colored glasses off and put my apocalyptic shades back on. And to be honest with you, my eyesight's bad, so I need these things to read my notes. So, but anyway, we were talking about Job. He was the richest man in the land, righteous, perfect, rich. He was protected. His name meant that he was hated, persecuted. He had some friends. Eliphaz, whose name meant my God is gold. Bildad, who meant confusing love. Zophar, somebody who easily gives up. And then there's a fourth person, Elihu. His name means he is my God. He's the guy that comes along a little bit later on in the story and chastises Job, tells him he's not so perfect, that maybe he's not blameless. Elihu, his name kind of means mighty man or even angel. So Elihu might be an angel walking on earth. And that's the interesting thing about Job, is once again, the time period he lived in, Eliphaz, his friend, the one whose name means my God is gold, he supposedly is a grandson of Esau. And Esau was a son of Jacob, who was a son of Isaac, like a grandson of Abraham. So Job could have known Abraham. Since Abraham was a very powerful person, so was Job. Job probably lived in the desert because he had sheep, cattle, camels. He was kind of like a nomadic herder. But his children, he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And his daughters are described as the most beautiful women in the world. Now, this is the thing that, somehow I was kind of drawn to Job because I was meditating and praying and just trying to advance the concept of into the wilderness. Because that's basically what has materialized, been my epiphany, is that the tribulation brings on an exodus into the wilderness for humanity. The biggest mass mobilization since the dawn of man. And if we don't choose to go out, if we don't hear God calling us out, I think a lot of us are going to be just pushed out. When they see the destruction coming, they'll be running to the wilderness. But anyway, spiritually I was kind of guided into Job, and looking at Job, it's amazing because the language of Job kind of matches up not only to the language you find when you read the story of Abraham in Genesis, but also it matches up to the pre-flood in the times of Noah. And once again, the end times, Jesus himself, in the book of Matthew in the New Testament, he says, here are the signs of the end times: earthquakes, famines, wars. It will be like in the days of Noah. People going around eating, drinking, making merry while destruction is coming. And the only one that heard the call was Noah, who built the ark, saved himself, saved his family. But what we find in Job is that his children, they appear to be ungodly, kind of wicked. Because 3 times, every time they mention the kids, it's like they were hanging out, eating and drinking, being merry, partying. When you look up the Hebrew words for that, eating and drinking and merry, it's kind of a negative thing. It has another meaning is bringing on God's wrath, headed towards destruction. Being on the wrong path. And we know that's how it is because God, or Job, right in the first chapter of Job's saying, hey man, you know, I offer up offerings for myself to God for forgiveness, and I'm putting up offerings and praying for forgiveness for my kids, because I know they've probably cursed God, that they're not following God's will. So Job was hoping that his devotion, his righteousness, you know, the fact that God found him perfect, that maybe he could kind of cover the sins of his kids. But you know, that's one thing you find out about the tribulation, is that, you know, eventually there's going to be a judgment day, and everybody has to be accountable for how they live their lives. You know, whether you're a force for good or a force for evil. And there's no middle ground. You can't sit there in the middle and say, you know, evil and good doesn't even exist, or I'm on both sides or no side. You know, because if you're not on the side of good, you're on the side of evil. That's how that works. But anyway, the language we find in Job is just amazingly similar, you know, because right in the first chapter of Job, we are told that the sons of God were hanging out in attendance with God, and that Satan was in their midst. And, you know, in the book of Genesis, you know, we find a couple of matching kind of phraseologies and language. Is it talks about the sons of God seeing that the daughters of men were beautiful, so they came down and mated with them. And I think it's not coincidental that Job's daughters are described as the most beautiful women on the planet. And then one of his friends is called confusing love, like mingling. You know, so I think that all ties into that. You know, so there was still commingling, fallen angels, sons of God, mating with humans in the days of Job and Abraham, and there was still angels walking around. And you know, we know that because even in Genesis, you know, when Abraham is told that Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be destroyed, who's he told by? An angel. And who goes to warn his nephew in Sodom and Gomorrah, his nephew Lot, to run to the wilderness, run for the hills, escape destruction? It's the angels. And the angels are even accosted by the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, where they say, we want to know you. You know, the tree of knowledge, know you. That's taken as an evil thing, you know, they wanted to sexually know those angels. Now, why would the people of Sodom and Gomorrah want to have sex with an angel unless angels were already having sex with humans? That's the way I look at it. But, you know, we see that same kind of language. The sons of God in attendance. Satan's in the midst of them, and then God's talking to Satan. And it's like they're old acquaintances, but God's kind of like, Satan, where you been? So, you know, at this point in time, Satan has access to heaven. So what we read in Revelations about Satan being kicked out of heaven hasn't happened yet. You know, on a spiritual level. But Satan basically tells God, hey man, I've been going to and fro on the earth, getting about my business, to and fro, here and there. And then God, you know, said, well, hey, if you've been down on earth, have you checked out Job? That dude's perfect. You know, when it comes to somebody following the right path in life and, you know, honoring and following God's will, Job, baby. But you know what, Satan? He enticed God. Why? Because he hates mankind. That's why Job's name means hated and persecuted, because Satan hated Job. He was jealous of him, of all the favor that he was finding in God's eyes. So Satan's whole plan was to turn Job against God, to get Job to curse God. So Satan enticed God, and he said, you know, the only reason Job, you know, loves you and has faith in you and is righteous and follows the path, your will, is because you've put a hedge around him. You've protected him. He's got the good life. And his faith isn't that strong. It's weak, in fact. In fact, put a little tribulation into his life, remove that hedge, take away the wall, let him be exposed to the real world, and you'll see him make another choice in life and not follow God. Curse God, in fact. And you know what? Satan enticed God, so God removed his protection from Job. And either God himself did it or he allowed it. It doesn't really matter how you look at it, because nothing happens unless God wants it to happen. But here was a man that God found perfect, righteous. And yet, that's where the story of Job begins. Where the wall is removed and all sorts of calamity and tribulation comes into Job's life. From his kids being killed, to his livestock, to his home. Eventually being covered in boils so bad he had to scrape his skin with a piece of rock. And you know what? Read Revelations, man. All that stuff's in there. All the wraths. And there's even a spot where, you know, these scorpion things come out in Revelations and they sting man and make these horrible sores all over man. But you know what? Men can't die. You know, even though they have all these horrible sores all over them. That's what happens in Revelations. That sounds exactly like what happens to Job. Because he gets all these sores, and yet God says, you know, Satan, you can't actually kill him. So there's a correlation, you know. What I'm doing, what I found, what's amazing is you take the book of Job, the window, the story that frames up Job and what's happening, and you overlay it right on top of the book of Daniel. You overlay it right on top of the book of Revelations, because that's what we do with Daniel and Revelations, is you overlap them on each other, because they're telling the same story. And what you find is mind-blowingly shocking, that Job apparently looks like an end-time man. And there's a lesson to be learned, knowledge to be learned about what's going to happen in the end times and what we need to prepare for. But, you know, just touching back on his sons and daughters, you know, they were eating and drinking and making merry, inviting doom, inviting the wrath of God. And that's kind of where we are at the end times. People going about their lives, don't have time for God, and if you even bring up the end times, you know, you get laughed at. It's like, oh, that's that crazy apocalypse dude. That's tribulation dude. Well, you know, we'll see. Only time will tell. But you know, I found it interesting that Job was praying and making offerings for his kids because he knew they were probably cursing God and sinning. And it was almost like he thought there might be some, like an insurance policy, that by him doing that, you know, his kids would be covered. But you know what you find out later in the story, that, you know, that's why they get wiped out. It's because they weren't covered by Job's prayers and offerings. But that's kind of, you know, to me, the rapture. You know, people that believe in the rapture, they want it to be this insurance policy that means they don't have to suffer anything or go through any kind of trials or tribulation. You know, they're going to be in for a rude awakening, just like Job. Just like his kids got wiped out. Anyway, that's where we're going to wrap up part 1. But you'll be amazed as we go through Job. He talks about the wilderness and the protection and, you know, the feeding, the sustenance. And he talks about the unbelievers being in the wilderness, staggering around like drunk people in chaos with no direction because they can't find the right path. And you're going to see him talking about the end times, the final day judgment, because as Job is sitting there, his whole life sucks. Everybody's telling him, just kill yourself. You know, curse God. He looks directly at Judgment Day, and he's bitter, and he doesn't understand what the hell is happening to him and why his whole life, which was awesome before, sucks now. And the one thing he's confident of is that he doesn't deserve none of it, but real wicked people, they deserve it, and they're going to get judged at the end. Man, sounds kind of like the end times, Revelations, the apocalypse. All right. I'm Ben Hellstead, your Jedi Warrior for Jesus. This is Job, End Time Man, Part 1. B. Keep the faith. Send me any input you got. You know, I'm still studying this stuff, trying to figure it on out. But I'll be bringing you the Part 2, where we'll dive really deep into the book of Job and look at some specific verses and just some amazing stuff as we prepare for Exodus 2012, into the wilderness, baby. All right, God bless everyone.